Hi folks, Chuck Black here. We are in the Quokka walkthrough and we finished initialization, and now we're talking about the next thing, which is going to be the views or the REST APIs. Now as I went into that, I realized that I wanted to do some reorganization of the code. We call that refactoring, and so I thought this would be a good opportunity to introduce you to some of the tools and mechanisms that we use when developing software. And so we are going to spend some time talking about JIRA, which is what you can use. It's one tool of many that you can use to manage a software project where you have things that you know you need to do, things that you're about to do, things you are doing, and things that you have done. So that will be one thing that we'll be looking at. Another thing we'll be looking at is how to use Git in order to accomplish these things. We're storing the data up in Git in the repository. As you can see here, this is my quokka repository. There are branches. I use branches in doing this. And finally, the code itself that we will be manipulating and looking at, we will be in here doing the refactoring ourselves and allowing PyCharm to help us a little bit. So hopefully that's of interest to you, and you will benefit from getting a taste of how some of these tools and aspects of real software development actually work in the real world. So let's get started. So doing this Quokka code walkthrough, I was wondering what should we do next? I have a number of choices. If I was to bring up the GitHub wiki for Quokka, which is what you're looking at right there, I can come down and scroll to the bottom and look at the Quokka implementation for the Quokka server, and I have a nice picture of what's going on right here. I can see that the user stuff is communicating with Quokka. There's the Quokka UI serving stuff. There's a database. If I scroll down a little bit further, there's a little bit more detail about the different things that I could talk about. I could talk about our use of SQL Alchemy in creation and maintaining of the database and the information in there. I could talk about communicating with devices. I could talk about the threads that exist in this Quokka service that we launched during initialization. I could talk about the remote workers. I've decided to start at the top in this box that I realize actually isn't here, but it is in other slides. That it would be the REST APIs. So let's look at a better view of this. I happen to have a link to a page where I describe all these different REST APIs, and this picture right here gives a decent view of what's going on. There's the user interface views, which is how the browser comes and gets data for hosts and services and devices and things of that nature. I also have these other type of views, and I could spend some time talking about those, and that is what I will do eventually. But when I come into the code, I look here in my Quokka project, and within this Python package called views, I see that I have a number of these different views: capture, device, port scan, traceroute, UI, worker views. And as I look at that, I'm not really happy with the way that I've broken things out over time. It's kind of grown organically. Used to be just the UI views, and then I needed to add stuff for having a remote device communicate with us using HTTP. That's for the SD-WAN. In the example that I gave with the simulation, SD-WAN stuff is doing HTTP to us, so I added that. Then when I began to implement the different diagnostic functions for packet capture, extended port scan, and traceroute, I ended up adding some of those views as well. And then when I did remote workers, I ended up with this worker views because I have the workers send heartbeats so that I know that they're alive and they can tell me their CPU utilization, memory usage, things of that nature. And so it actually looks like I kind of wish that it didn't look, because this UI views piece is really, for the most part, the biggest piece. In fact, if I was to look at my UI views, and if I was to scroll down to the very bottom, you would see that, well, there's a lot of lines in this file, 370 lines in this file, I can tell you from experience the last project that I worked on, which was with people with computer science degrees, master's degrees in computer science, etc., working at a big institution. We had a few files that were over 1,000 lines long, and I really don't like that. I prefer to have it a little bit more organized. So it's been itching in the back of my mind to reorganize how I've done these views for a while. And so that's what I thought I would do today. So today, instead of actually going through this actual code and looking at it, which we'll do probably in the next walkthrough, what I'm going to do is do refactoring of this and see if I can do it in a reasonably understandable way, but also introduce you to some of the different aspects of the software development process that you will want to be aware of if you're going to be a true software developer and move away and beyond somebody who just writes a little Python script into somebody who actually understands how software gets written. And so in order to do that, I'm going to treat this as if I was working on a project. Now, if I was working on a project, we would probably have some type of tool that would be using to manage our software process that would keep track of things that I need to do, things that I'm doing, and things that I've done. There's a number of tools. What I happen to have used in the development of Quokka, and I should be using it religiously and without fail, but I tended not to do that, to only do it in fits and spurts. But what I did use was a tool called JIRA. That would be JIRA. And if I show you here, this is JIRA. It's from Atlassian. And this is actually recording the stuff that is in the backlog. The backlog is the stuff that I know needs to be done and I would like to do, but I haven't started it yet. I have this other lane, as we call them, in this Kanban board that is called selected for development. So this is the stuff that I'm going to develop. This would be the stuff that I'm in the process of developing right now. This is the stuff that I've done. Now you might have ready for test. You could have other of these columns that you can use in a real environment, but this is just by default the ones that I had. And if you could see the dates on these, you'd realize these are really old. I haven't been in here in a couple of months. I've been mainly doing videos, and David Bombal and I are the ones who have access to it. I've been the one who's been using it for the most part. We have a few comical ones, intended to be comical ones, between David and I, due to a time when I was visiting where David lives in the UK, and he was my tour guide for a while, and he referred to himself as a dodgy tour guide, and I referred to myself as a lousy tourist. But those are really unnecessary. The real ones are things that I ended up putting in here. You can see I have some from back when I was using my CML stuff. As you may have heard me mention, I was a little bit, actually more than a little bit, underwhelmed with the CML stuff, and so I've actually dropped using that, plus my laptop that I ended up having to use only has 16 gig, and that's not enough to run CML. I'd have to buy another laptop, so I'm not actually doing that now. But don't pay attention to what's actually in here, but pay attention to what you would end up doing. So let's say I wanted to create, begin to work on a task involving refactoring this the views. And so what I would end up doing is I would come in here and I would create it. So I'm clicking on create, and pardon me while I stay silent and I type stuff in. So you can see that I've created this one called refactor views, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to immediately move it over here into in progress, because that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to sit here and wait and implement it later. At some point in time I will clean up this stuff, but for right now this is where I will leave this. And this is I just kind of want to give you a little tiny taste of how we would use this in the real world. And I probably should clean it up, which I will do, but not on this video right now. All right. So I've created this, and I know that I want to do something with it. Some tools have connectivity between their software development process tool as well as their software management tool. I am just using GitHub for my software management, so I'm going to move over to GitHub now, and I'm going to begin to show you how I would work on a new story. These are called stories. It's more of a task or whatever, and how I would do that using GitHub. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure a couple of things. I'm going to go to my directory and I'm going to say git status. This is going to tell me what is actually being worked on and needs to be changed here in Quokka. That would be inclusive of both the Quokka server and the Quokka UI. I should just ignore this file. This is what I use for passing traceroute graphs back and forth. I've conditioned myself to just ignore it. If I was smart, I would just make sure that I ignore it, but I haven't done that. So I know that everything's up to date at this point in time. So what I want to do first is I just want to make sure everything is running correctly. So at this point in time, before I begin, so I am going to actually do my run of Quokka here. So I'm starting Quokka. It looks like it's starting okay. I'm going to create a new window and move it down here. And I'm going to go into the same Quokka directory and start the UI. And the UI, I don't really care about this, so I'm going to shrink it down and just put it down there. This is going to start the UI, the NPM stuff, and it's going to load this thing. And I will see, hopefully, that it's going to be up and running in just a moment. It takes it a while to start the development server. If I was to have this up and running, I'd probably see that I'm near the top of using all of my memory. Let's have a look here. It's not so bad. I'm using 4 out of 5.8, so we're doing pretty good. You can see the CPU is working really hard as it starts up all of its threads and it gets going. I can see that my UI is up and going now. I don't seem to have successfully pulled any of these yet because I'm impatient. I'm going to ask it to refresh. Okay, so this is good. It's beginning to go through the polling of these devices. It's probably discovering hosts. Yeah, look at that. It's already discovered. Oh, it's got all of these hosts. We keep the hosts in here that were there before. So there are 28 hosts in there. Let's make sure that the services, I think I realized, and I may have mentioned this in, I can't remember if it was in the Python or I think it was in the walkthrough, the Quokka walkthrough, that my service thread over time seems to have a issue in it, a defect in it where it goes down, but everything seems to be running fine here. I haven't been running for a while, so I don't have any really recent data, but that is, be that as it may, let's look at hosts and make sure that the hosts are running okay. I haven't, yeah, I can see that there's stuff going on and I have summary data. And it's occurring to me as I go through here, why don't I have summary data for my services? Maybe, oh, that's because my service thread went away. So looking back at the last certain amount of time, I don't really have data for it. So I need to work on that bug. But the point is, Quokka seems to be running okay, and so I'm happy about that. Let's see if these have all turned green. Okay, we're all good to go with respect to Quokka running correctly as it should. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down. I have to hit Control-C twice, and it attempts to shut it down gracefully. You can see I even print here that I'm attempting to shut things down gracefully. It's trying to stop all of the threads, and this may take up to a minute. Oh, it's already done. So all the threads are shut down and it's terminated. I don't really need to kill this, so I'll just leave the Quokka UI up and running. All right, so at this point in time, we have a fully operational Quokka. And remember the branch. So I'm throwing stuff out here about Git. Some of you are familiar with Git. Many of you are not. And this is not the point where I'm going to be describing Git in all of its gory details. I will be doing it in the when we get to the Python 52 weeks, when I'm done with files. I have a little marker here that I'm going to be teaching you guys about Git, but let me just show you a little bit about what's going on with it here. I'm in my directory where I have the stuff, so there is Git information in here. If I do a ls -a, you can see that I have this git ignore and this git folder, in fact. So it is my Git directory for this. So from here, I can say git status, and it will tell me, which is what I've done before, this is where things are. Now I want to create a branch. I probably wouldn't be doing this. I've done branches for remote workers. I've done branches. In fact, if I was to go up here to Git, I think I have Git in here somewhere. Where do I have it? I don't have it. Let me go here. Let me go here and let me show you. I'm going to go back to my code for Quokka, and here it allows me to actually look and see what my branches are. And if I say view all branches, then it will pop up something that shows me different branches that I have used. So I had a remote worker via HTTP branch that I worked on. I had a traceroute branch. I had sniffing for host branch. These I've not actually closed, so I probably should close those branches, but you can see I've done a little bit of branch stuff, but not too much. And why is that? Because I'm the only one working on it. So for all intents and purposes, I could probably just do all of everything on the main branch, but I want to introduce you a little bit anyway to how we would do this in the real world. So I'm going to create a branch for doing this UI view refactoring. So I've created a new branch. This git checkout allows me to check out a branch, and when I specify -b, it will create this branch for me. So I kind of did a shortcut there. Now it shows me if I do git status, if I look here, I'm on branch UI view refactoring. So now I can do stuff, and things on the main branch will not end up getting modified in any way. So it's safe. Now, I will go over this when we talk about Git in more detail, but typically what you will end up having is you will have production, you'll have staging, you'll have development. Those will be three main branches. And off of development, you will have all of your different people working on different branches and creating new branches off of development, merging them back into development. So what I'm doing in this case is I don't have all of that because it's not a real project, but I am going to be taking this branch, this UI view refactoring, and I will be doing my work here. In fact, if I was to do this and click here on my PyCharm, you can see it's already told me that I'm on this new branch. So PyCharm is smart enough to figure out what branch I'm actually on. So at this point in time, I can begin to do my refactoring, and that's what I'm about to do now. So this is a good thing that PyCharm is going to do for me. At least I'm assuming that it will do this for me. It is saying when I wanted to move UI views up into this new Python package that I created, Don't worry, I've got the same name here, which could cause problems, but I'm going to break out UI views into UI device views, UI host views, UI service views, etc. But for right now, I'm just moving it up into UI views. And here it's saying, oh, I'm going to go move this. Do you want me to search for references and do all of the refactoring for me? And I'm going to say yes. And at this point in time, I should have my UI views be referenced correctly in all the rest of quokka. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start to run things just to make sure that everything is okay. So while we're waiting for this to shut down, interestingly, it doesn't seem like PyCharm did an exceptionally good job of making the refactoring that I wished that it had done. And maybe I had something clicked incorrectly from what I had done before when I moved things around, and so it didn't actually look in all the places. But here I needed to reference this I had to modify this to reference the correct location. And so we'll see if this actually worked. Okay, this one looks like it's actually working now. Yeah, my REST requests, my UI requests all seem to be getting satisfied correctly. So that's good. I now have my UI stuff working and operational in this particular folder. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to want to break this out, this large file, this UI views file, and put it into UI, call the different Python modules, device views, host views, services views, etc. So I'm going to begin to do that now. Okay, I believe I have in the device views all of the UI/device related stuff. And in UI device status, and in UI views, which I'm going to continue to take stuff away, I have all the non-UI device. In fact, I'm going to say Control F/UI/device. And you can see there are no results. So I know in this file, there's no reference to that particular URL. So that's good. Let's go ahead and see if I've done this correctly. Now, this is just a tip. This is how I like to do things, which is to test along the way regularly to make sure that I've done what I needed to do. And I just realized I did something that's not going to work. Let's see if I can actually show this to you. So let me go to hosts. So hosts is working. Services goes and gets the services. That's working. We didn't look at workers before, but I'm assuming that it shows the workers, which I don't have any workers going. Now I'm assuming that there will be nothing here under devices. Sure enough, there's nothing there under devices, and here's why. This is a little bit more of an advanced thing. This bites me in the butt regularly, and it's this. When I go to init.py, remember when I said this is where we tell Flask what are all of my APIs? Well, guess what? I told it this, but I'm going to need to tell it all of my other views as well. And how many views do I have now? I have device views and UI views. And so I'm going to call this. In fact, yeah. All right, let's see if that does the trick. Well, that's shutting down. As an aside, I'm beginning to wonder, you know, the whole namespace for the name of these particular views. I have device views, which is underneath UI views. So if you see both of these, then it makes sense, and you don't get confused with just the device views, which is a device communicating with us. And so I'm wondering if I should be calling this something else. I'm not going to do that right now, but that may be something I want to refactor in the future. Let's make sure that this is working. Let's start it again. And remember, our problem was that we had no devices shown right here. So is everything up and running? Everything's up and running. Let's go and do a refresh and see if our devices show up. Sure enough, those APIs are now accessible. Flask knows about them, and they will be returned. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and do hosts and services and possibly something else, I'm not sure. But that's what I'll be doing, and I'll just stay silent and speed up my typing while I do that. So something else I want to show you is you will have noticed that when I created these smaller Python modules that have the service views versus the host views versus the device views in them, I just copied in all the includes. Now, clearly I don't need all of these. One thing I could have done is meticulously gone through and figured out what do I need, what do I don't need. Instead, I just copied everything over. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a very nice Python feature where I can do a Control-Alt-O and it will eliminate unnecessary import statements. So I just did Control-Alt-O. You probably saw it said imports optimized, and we're back looking better. Didn't get rid of this, and I'm not sure why. Let me try this again. Control-Alt-O. Okay, well, maybe PyCharm was just confused for some reason. But that seems to be gone. let's see what it says. There's a blank line at the end of the file. Didn't like that. There's actually a few blank lines. If I were to go back here and let's see. Now let's see if it is a little bit happier. Yeah, it's happier. I can do that for my host views as well. Notice I did a Control N so that I could type in the name of the file. I know the name of the file. So this is called host views, and it's located in quokka.views.ui views, and that's the one that I want. So it's going to open it for me, and you can see I can do my same Control Alt O in this one as well, and the imports are optimized. Look, there's that bug again. It is erroneously telling me that Flask is not necessary, but in fact it is. It's also going to complain about these, so why don't I get rid of these? Oops, I needed to have this line at the end of the file. Let's see if it's gotten rid of this. So PyCharm issue, Control Alt O again, and now it says imports are optimized and it's happy. So and I could do that as well over here for UI views. Now you notice I've gotten rid of a bunch of stuff. My file is now only 200 or so lines. You can see I have a lot of worker stuff in here, trace route, extended scan, capture, a bunch of this reset stuff. And then here's a bunch of yellows that indicate the unused stuff. So I'm going to do Control Alt O because that's easy and it automatically gets rid of a bunch of stuff for me. Notice this file is suddenly a lot cleaner and it has less stuff in it. So if I go back to my project, you can see I still calling this UI views for whatever reason, just keeping the same name. I'll figure out what to do with that. But this is an example of how one might refactor. Now, as you know, we're out on this branch, and if I was to go and start up a new terminal, and I was to go to my quokka directory and do a git status, then it's going to tell me all of these things have been changed. I have new files. I need to commit stuff. It modified a bunch of stuff here, and what I can do is I can say git commit, and when it says, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. I'm on a different branch, okay? So I'm on this UI view refactoring. So now what I do when I'm done, and again, I'm going to go over this later on, I'm going to say git commit. I'm going to give it the message moving device host service views. And then I can say git push origin, and then the name of my branch that I'm going to be doing it is UI view. So I'm going to say git push origin UI view refactoring. You don't have to understand all this. I'm just showing this to you when I go over things in detail. You'll have a better idea about what actually is going on, and you'll understand Git a little bit better. I will show you that if we go to GitHub, then I'm hoping that if I refresh this, then I should have my new branch show up. And sure enough, UI view refactoring, I can click on this branch. I actually don't know what it's going to do when I click on it. It's showing me the branch, the code for my branch. If I was to go down into quokka and into views, then I can see that I have this new Python package called UI views, and in it I have device views, host views, service views. If I was to go back and say, put me back onto main, and it's trying to show me these UI views, it's not actually there. So I'm going to try to go back. Basically what it was is I was out on a branch that doesn't exist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to quokka views, and here you can see that it looks like this. Now I'm going to change, and go to main. And let's see, this should not squawk this time. There, this is what it was like before I made any of those changes. Remember, UI views, if I was to look at this file, it had all the stuff for devices, etc. This is how source control works. I haven't made any changes to main. We can still build production from main, and there will be none of my changes in it because I'm out on a branch making these software changes. As I say, this is I'm not teaching you all about this. I'm just giving you a minor, super high level taste of how software management works and how refactoring works. And I will probably go back and complete this, and eventually I will merge my changes back into main, and then it will become the actual code that is on our main branch. Hopefully that gave you a general idea of how you might do refactoring such as this. And you'll notice these were green and blue before. Now they're just white. That means that PyCharm is intelligent enough to know that we have actually committed and pushed those changes out to our branch. So there's not outstanding stuff out there. All right, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense and you guys get a taste of some of the things of what happens when we do like the full software development life cycle. And in this situation, we were just doing some refactoring. So just to wrap things up here, what we've done under views is I have created 3 different Python packages, one for remote devices that are sending HTTP requests to us. That is simulated in that SD-WAN device simulation stuff, not with the Cisco sandbox devices. Those I communicate with directly. So there's just the device views and device views in that situation. Really, there's register, which I don't use, and then heartbeat, which I do use. And in a similar way to device, if I go down here, there's workers. These are remote workers, and the worker views portion has register and then a heartbeat. But these 3, capture views, port scan views, and traceroute views, they're basically for retrieving the information or getting sent information that we will then store in the database to be returned by the user interface. So all I did here was I moved them out of the views directory and pushed them down into workers. So these all reflect workers communicating data back to us. This one down here is the heartbeat. This is the actual data. And then the one that we had the most work on that I did and I showed you is for the UI views. And those views are for getting lists of devices, individual information about device status, etc. The same for hosts, the same for services, and then I just bailed everything that was left for scans and for reset, packet capture, etc. This is all UI based, so this is the UI request to do the thing. So the UI request to do an extended scan, those I left in this particular Python module, and it used to be called UI views. I just called it to MISC views. If it grew to be bigger, then I think I would end up breaking it out some more. But for right now, I'll just leave it like that. So I've reorganized it, refactored, if you want to call it that, which it really is. It was pretty easy to do. I showed you a little bit about using JIRA to do various things. If this refactor views, once I was done, and if I was tested it, then I would take it and I would move it over there, and we would see that it was done. If there was a testing column, then it would go to the test department, etc. We looked a little bit in this session at using Git to do stuff, and you can see I've not merged it back in yet, but I have stored everything away. This is where we had a bunch of the changes. In fact, if I was to do git status right now, you would see more changes, assuming I can print it out. This is free. You can see Git's aware when I've renamed files, I've created new files. Actually, that got created for me, these _init when I created the packages. I moved stuff around. Basically, I made a few changes, and then I would just do a git commit and then a git push to save it, and then eventually do a git merge. But we're not talking all about the details of Git. Just wanted you to get a little bit of familiarity with it. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of how things work in the software world if you're working on a real project, and you'll have a little bit more familiarity with things like JIRA and Git and refactoring than you did before. Hope this helps. Thanks.